and for organizing this so that we can meet with everyone who's online. Hi, everyone. As Edgardo said, my name is Mark. I am originally from Mexico, spent the last 5 years-ish in Canada. Now I'm in Spain, but I have no idea for how long, but that's another story. So I'll start by sharing my my presentation, and since I can't see anything other than myself, could someone please just confirm with me if you can see my presentation? Can you see my screen?
It's okay.
Awesome. Cool. Perfect. Thank you so much, Edgardo. Okay, so today we'll be talking about sustainability, journalism, and tourism. Those are 3 topics that I have been working with for at least the past decade. I'd say even more than that. It's 3 things that I'm very passionate about, and it's 3 things that can be, and hopefully in the future even more so, interconnected. So without further ado, let's start. Just a tiny bit about myself. This seems very narcissistic, but just so that I can share a bit of the credentials, like why is it that I'm here and I'm talking to you. I'm a travel writer / journalist, professional photographer. I have been working with, in partnership with DMOs, tourism offices, hospitality industry companies, and the editorial world for almost 2 decades. I am no longer a quinceañera. I've published work on a bunch of different magazines, from Esquire, Glamour, and GQ to National Geographic and Travel and Leisure, you name it. And most of my work, especially in the last decade or so, focuses on indigenous cultures, ancestral wisdom, and just like wilderness and conservation. For the most part, environmental conservation, but I happen to think that there's no way to care about environmental conservation if there's no link to cultural and social conservation as well. The last part I think is very important. I think no human is illegal, which is something that we should be reminding ourselves as often as possible in these days. In case you are curious and then you want to actually do some proper research, that's my portfolio and my Instagram account. Feel free to stalk me. See if you find something that draws your attention and makes you, inspired and do something. Or if you find tons of inconsistencies between what I'm saying and what I'm publishing, please feel free to let me know as well. Okay, so let's start and let's talk about sustainability, journalism, and tourism, and how do the 3 of them can or sometimes aren't connected. I think that we see it nowadays quite often. Sustainability went from being some sort of like topic that was not mainstream, was not, very much present in everyday life, to something that's becoming more and more important. And for a while, sustainability was kind of like one of the many niches in the tourism industry. And nowadays, luckily, even though that comes with greenwashing, but that's something that we'll talk about later, it also is a kind of practice, a kind of ethos, a kind of philosophy that is or should be pretty much around, regardless of us talking about adventure travel or MICE travel or family travel or any kind of adjective or market that we want to put right next to the word travel. So just because I want to make sure that I'm actually with someone out there that's like listening and is like interested in this kind of like topics, I'll ask a question, and if maybe 2 or 3 of you want to answer, it's like a super simple question. Whenever we think of sustainability in tourism, what do we think of? Like, don't get like super picky and try to suggest a topic worth of a doctoral thesis. Just if you think tourism and sustainability, what comes to mind? Anyone willing to share a thought or 2? Okay, I'll read the silence as a no and move on to the next slide, which might actually give you a hint. So I think
there are messages. Sorry, Mark. There are messages in the chat about
sorry. Thank you for letting me know.
No
Okay,
problem.
nature, carbon footprint, distances in traveling, supporting the local communities. Thank you. A bunch of good examples in there. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And sorry for assuming that there was like silence. It was just like me not actually seeing the chat. Traveling for discovery. So what I'm sharing right here with you is like 3 examples of some of the many ways in which we can talk about sustainability and tourism, right? So anything from like spare the straw, save a turtle, to I will give you a refillable water bottle every single time that you go to a different hotel and destination so that you don't buy single use plastics, but end up with like 173 refillable water bottles, or we won't be actually changing and washing towels every single day so that you can actually save the rainforest. Now, am I making a bit of a caricature out of this? Yes, 100%. Now, do I think that if the options are doing absolutely nothing or maybe avoiding the use of single-use plastics by having a refillable water bottle, 100% let's go for that. Do I think that there's actually an issue with straws and turtles? Yes, and it's not something that I think, like there's papers in there and researchers working with turtles that actually prove that. And do I think that we can actually, if we multiply the number of hotel rooms in the world, the number of occupied hotel rooms in the world that have guests, how much water could we potentially save if we stop washing towels every single day? Would it make a difference? Yes. Now, do I think that if we are trying to get into like a serious conversation about sustainability and tourism, and not only that, but how do we share those messages as storytellers, professional journalists? Can we talk about sustainability and leave the conversation at this level? Yes. Do I think that there's something way more deep than having a refillable water bottle and sparing the straw? 100%. I could be talking about the many, many cases in which sustainability has an important role, and it comes to play when it comes to tourism. But today we're going to be talking about 2 different things: the exotic item and the viable work. Right now, it might not make sense, but I hope that by the end of the next hour, it will. And we'll start with the exotic item. And before we get into this, I just want to share with you a very basic principle that you might have heard before, which is called the triple balance, which basically is this like pretty entrepreneurial concept that was born to make sure that when we were working towards sustainability, we're considering 3 main principles, right? So the environmental one, the social one, and the economical one. And the 3 of them working together. So basically, the principle of the triple balance suggests that there's no possible way to be sustainable if we're not considering the 3 of them. So with that in mind, we'll start with the exotic item. I'm not sure if any of you has heard of the North Sentinel Island. It was kind of like in the news recently, but it is in the news every once in a while for the wrong reasons. So just so that you have an idea of where is it that we're talking about, I'm trying to see if we can locate ourselves. This is the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And so that you can have a better idea, is this island kind of like in between the coast of India and Myanmar. It is well known because every once in a while ends up in the news. Sentinel Island, there's a culture that lives there that has not had contact with any Westerners kind of like in a really, really, really long time. So it is a dependency of India in terms of like government taking care of the island, and it's pretty much restricted. So long story short, that's not the place where you are going to be traveling to produce your next travel piece. Why am I sharing this? I will share this video with you. It is a BBC News TikTok. It's super short, but it might actually remind you of why is it that we're talking of this one island.
A US influencer has been arrested after traveling to a remote island and leaving a can of Coke for the world's most isolated tribe. 24-year-old Michaela Victoria Polyakov allegedly landed on Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean in an attempt to make contact with the isolated Sentinel. Survival International, a group that advocates for the rights of tribal people, said the alleged act endangered the man's own life and the lives of the tribe, calling it deeply disturbing. A review of his GoPro camera footage showed Michaelos' entry and landing into the restricted North Sentinel Island, where it's illegal for foreigners or Indians to travel within 3 miles of the island to protect people living there. That's according to the police chief who spoke to AFP. But this isn't the first time that Michaelos visited this region. According to police, he's done it twice before, including when he used an inflatable kayak last October before he was stopped by hotel staff. Survival International also said that the Sentinelese have made their wishes to avoid outsiders clear over many years, and have underlined that such visits pose a risk to a community that has no immunity to outside diseases.
So in short, that happened. So this guy, American content producer, Mikhailov, traveled there. It was his third attempt, and he actually got caught. Not long after that, he got caught, and he's in prison. The thing is, this is not something that happened just with that one person that one time. And we could be talking just about this one particular case for hours and hours in a row. The YouTube channel for which Mikhailov was producing this content, which is his own, is called Neo-Orientalist. The name itself is also a very interesting topic to debate on. I am not sure if you're familiar with the term Orientalism. If you are, awesome. If you're not, I would actually advise you to look more into it. But Orientalism basically is this concept that was born, weirdly enough, in the Western academia world to explain this phenomenon in which the Western world conceives Orient as one whole thing, exotic thing. And not only that, but it is built not so much on Orient itself, but on the prejudices and stereotypes that Western world has of Orient. Anyway, the fact that not only did this guy go there by, this is important to state, it was not him landing there, by mistake. It was not him adrift ending up in that island, which would have been problematic regardless. It was him on his third attempt to go there specifically to look for the exotic, to look for the one tribe that had never been contacted before. This had nothing to do with the Sentinelese in themselves. It had to do with him, right? And why am I sharing this? Because when it comes to journalism, one could say, right, well, this was one guy. This was a YouTuber. This was basically one guy that's not like media, right? Like that's not at least traditional media, which takes us to this. What I'm sharing here with you is the cover of a National Geographic magazine of the 70s, of the 1970s. It's August 1972. It's been a while now, so we are not that familiar, but if we were to ask someone who was around, like in the 70s and then in the 80s about the Tassadai, they might actually remember the concept. Now, the Tassadai, as presented by National Geographic, it was something very similar to what Mikhailov was actually looking for in the North Sentinel Island. It was an indigenous culture of the Philippines that had never had any contact with any kind of Western world or any kind of other civilization. They were living in caves. They had no idea what clothes were, and they were discovered, quote unquote, in the 70s. National Geographic not only had like the cover story, it was like close to 32 pages, I think, of like a massive feature, because this was something massive, right? Like it's not every day that you come across a tribe that has never had contact with the outside world, whatever that means. Anyway, this gets published. A bunch of people from all around the world, mostly the Western world, travels to the Philippines to have some sort of contact with the Tassadai. The Tassadai complain that they are overwhelmed, so not long after the first visits to the Tassadai people, the Tassadai encampment, because the government, there was a ministry back in the day. Actually, the guy that discovered these guys was not an anthropologist, was not like a traveler. It was actually the minister of, I can't remember the name of the exact title of the ministry, but it was something like the Ministry of indigenous cultures or something along that line, which was a politician, by the way. And this was during the Marcos government, which ended up being a dictatorship. Anyway, the first people come, visit the Tasadai, they close the site, and no one ever again sees the Tasadai until after Marcos's government ends in the mid-1980s. So a Swiss journalist travels there, and he discovers the whole thing was a setup. Now, do the Tasadai exist as a culture? Yes. Were they cavemen? No. Were they wearing clothes? Yes. Had they been in touch with people prior to this whole thing? Yes, 100% yes. Now, why was it such a big deal? Why were we seeing National Geographic think about this? If we think of the concept, forget about if it's either the North Sentinel Island and the Sentinelese, or if it's the Tasadai in the Philippines, or if it's Mowgli in the Jungle Book, there's something about the other being so different as possible, that draws our attention. And that's something that's almost engraved in travel itself. This, of course, was problematic, and this was problematic because the Tasadai were not the tribe that National Geographic was describing. But even if that had been the case, it would have been problematic because of the way in which it could have been described. This is from 2018. National Geographic published a special issue on race as a topic. And among the many features that they shared, they were working on how was National Geographic as a brand itself sharing content on race and different cultures. Spoiler alert, I mean, that's there for you to read. I actually very much encourage you to read it. The issue itself is a treasure. This article itself was National Geographic, the editorial team, asking, asking professionals in, the realm of anthropology and history to please review the coverage that the brand, the title, has had in regards to indigenous cultures. And it was terrific. Now, this was 2018. Some things have changed, but some others haven't. Now, if we take exoticism, and if we think and thought of exoticism in travel, it's kind of always been there. There's something about the unknown, right? I'm not sure if it's your case. Hopefully there's an exception, but for the most part, when we ask our friends, our colleagues, our family, there's all sort of like attractions and towns and maybe national parks and museums that we want to go to that are pretty close or reasonably close to where we live. And because they are around the corner, we can go anywhere, and we end up not planning it, and we end up not going. But unlike those places, like if I am in Spain and I want to go to India, I have to plan for that, right? And it's such a remote place, and it's the unknown place. So I have to do that. And then it is in movies, it is in popular culture, but it's also pretty much, as I was saying, engraved in tourism. I'm sharing here like 3 different examples. The first one, though, might not necessarily have to do with travel. This is a movie, and we know that. That idea of the traveler, of the adventurer, is not so different from like the people traveling to go to the unknown and go back with like crazy stories on the exotic. Now, the other 2 posters are actual posters that we were using advertising by both Barrick, which is an old Brazilian airline that is no longer around, and the State Railway of Thailand. And they're both promoting the destinations as the exotic, right? So never miss exotic Thailand and come to the exotic Amazon in Brazil. I'm sharing this quote from this person, Stephanie Powers. I will admit, I had no idea who this person was, and it's completely irrelevant, but I really like the quote. It's an American actress. I think that's not the important thing, but what she's saying, which is pretty common to hear, she says, if you are going to a destination where the food might be more exotic than usual, always err on the side of caution. Which takes us to the next slide. We have here chapulines, which are some sort of like grasshoppers that are pretty common. It's a kind of food, a snack that is used in the southern part of Mexico, and it's basically fried grasshoppers with chili powder. Then we have gebul, and I am so sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that terribly. My Korean is non-existent, but it's this seafood that people eat. Like it's kind of like a street food, something that you buy in the street in Korea, like both in rural Korea, but also in Seoul and the big cities. You go buy that, eat it raw, just like that. And then we have the super exotic rainbow bagel, right? Why am I sharing these three examples of things? There's nothing exotic in itself, nothing by definition. For something to be exotic, you need someone from a very, very far away land that has never seen, tasted, heard of something like that. And the problem with exotism is that when the otherness is not in itself, but in function of oneself, we're actually not talking or appreciating the other. The other becomes kind of an ornament for us. And that's pretty common in the travel industry, right? So if we think of those three examples, and again, if you want to either share on the chat, or if someone wants to actually share like just expressing with their voice for a bit, I'm not sure if you had heard of either chapulines or gebul or rainbow bagels. These are three things that I think a bunch of people might find exotic. But I'm telling you, if you are from New York City, you just don't find rainbow bagels exotic. You might find them, like colorful. You might find them weird. You might find a bunch of different adjectives to talk about rainbow bagels, but it's definitely not going to be exotic. If you live in Korea, probably there's nothing exotic about gebul. You might like it or not. You might eat it or not, but there's nothing exotic about it. And same with the chapulines. If you are from Oaxaca or if you are from Chiapas in Mexico, there's probably nothing exotic about chapulines. So along the same line, and just for the sake of curiosity, is anyone who's like right now with us on the Zoom, like finding about one of these foods for the first time? Like, is anything here something that you would have described or you would still describe as exotic? Okay, we have some comments. Yeah, Danny says they would. What is it, Danny, that you find exotic? Like the three of them, one of them? Okay, chapulines and gebul. Okay. If while we wait just a bit more, just to see if somebody else wants to share their thoughts. The thing about sharing stories about the exotic item, about exoticism, is that it ends up forming a narrative in which I myself, having grown up in Mexico City and being from Mexico, it is true too that in Mexico City chapulines might not be the most common thing, but I still tell you, it is way more common for someone in Mexico City to find chapulines than rainbow bagels. But because of the way in which the narratives become discourses that we repeat, I am not sure if a bunch of my friends and colleagues in Mexico City even would find chapulines to be more exotic than rainbow bagels. And I think that's an interesting exercise that that we can, do back home with our colleagues and stuff, and ask about something that might not be easily accessible in the place where we are. And yet we don't find as exotic as something that is somehow accessible, but because of these narratives, we find different. As a white person myself, I really like the way Westerns often think of, for example, boxes for something exotic or even savage. Yeah. We won't have a chance. Thank you, Sophie, for sharing that. I agree with you. This is not something that we're going to be talking about in this class, but hopefully if you end up joining the master, we will. That idea of savage, which is very linked to the whole idea of the exotic other, is pretty much a thing. Like, I think nowadays, one of the things that we talk about a lot when it comes to wildlife in tourism, the role of wildlife in tourism, as if wildlife needed a role in tourism, has to do with captivity. And it's hard for us to process in 2025 that that was a thing. But, and listen, because this is very important, we're not talking about the 16th or 17th century. In the 20th century, some European countries had, and some American countries as well, had human zoos in which they were showcasing those quote-unquote savages as an attraction. But anyway, that's a whole different story. Well, this is a very synthesized version of the exotic item and why is it that exoticism is a problem. Now, how do we link all of this to journalism? Because we have been talking a lot about tourism and sustainability. Us as content producers and content creators, regardless of us becoming eventually the editor-in-chief of Travel and Leisure or the person behind a TikTok or Instagram account with 2.5 million followers or viewers. Again, when we perceive the other and we leave room for the other just in relation to ourselves rather than themselves, like if the existence of the other, if the cosmovision of the other, if the reality of the other is not enough in itself and has a role in our narratives just according to where we are and where are we going, how weird is it to, and then fill in the blank, or the 20 weirdest things that you can eat here and there. Those narratives, of course, some are more problematic than others, can lead to YouTube channels called Neo-Orientalist, in which someone tries to go to an island that has restricted access because the people in there don't want to have anything to do with outsiders, and they have actually shared that. So moving on to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is the viable work. So let's talk about sustainability in the work of the content creator or the travel writer itself. These are just like three examples, like random, but like think of most of the big newspapers, newsrooms, news agencies. These are literally copy-paste versions of like their principles and ethic codes, right? So this one is AP, the Associated Press. There's a bunch of things in here, but the one that I want us to be centering on for the next part, which is the viable work, is this one, which says, we avoid behavior or activities that create as a conflict of interest that compromise our ability to report the news fairly and accurately. So conflict of interest is very much an issue when it comes to journalism and ethics. Here is one more that has to do with the BBC. This one, when it comes to the BBC journalistic principles, and it says we are independent of outside interests and arrangements that could compromise our editorial integrity. The last one, which is Reuters, which says disclose potential or actual conflicts of interest to a manager. And then they talk about do not pay for information or accept a bribe or trade on privileged information. Why am I sharing these principles? If any of you has already been working in the editorial world or in the travel world creating content, you probably know by now that it is common for either tourism offices or hotel groups or travel agencies to actually invite content creators on trips for them to then report on the activities they experienced, the food they tried, the hotel they slept at, right? And that in itself could potentially be a conflict if we think of old school standard journalism practices in which there's no room for that because it is a conflict of interest, right? So it doesn't matter which magazine you are talking about. For the most part nowadays, and I say for the most part because there are some exceptions, these magazines make their work viable today by accepting these press trips. You can be on staff, you can be a freelancer, and you go on one of these trips in which, again, it can be a tourism office, it can be a hotel group, it can be a travel agency, it can be a brand. They invite you to go on a press trip so that then you can share the photos, the videos, the article, you name it. There's some exceptions. Still nowadays, there's some few editorial exceptions that will not allow for either big media discounts or complimentary stays. One of them is the New York Times. I'm sharing this one specifically because when it comes to the New York Times, you cannot accept any of this. Now, this is not privileged information that I have. I disclose that I don't work with the New York Times. This is available online for anyone to see. When it comes to travel coverage, the New York Times has this really strict policy in which they say, we cannot accept neither complimentary stays nor activities, nor media discounts, nor do we work with freelancers that have participated in such activities in the past. And then they do say, like, there's some, exceptions, like if it is a freelance writer that may be engaged in a free press trip 12 years ago, but they do no longer participate in these activities, they can do it. So if we were to talk kind of like in lab conditions about it, kind of makes sense. It 100% makes sense because there's always a conflict of interest when I am going to a destination to talk about the destination being hosted by the destination. Same thing applies to a hotel, same thing applies to a restaurant, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that by doing that, there's a level of censorship. I am not able to share the words that I think. I have to censor myself. I'm not saying that, but there's clearly a conflict of interest. I don't know if you remember this person. If you saw Sex and the City, or if you didn't, it doesn't matter. I am not a big fan. My partner is. I tried watching it recently, and I have like no emotional affection to the characters because I didn't see it when it first aired. And all I can say is that I think it ages terribly, but that's irrelevant as well. Why are we talking about Carrie Bradshaw? If you saw the series, then you know, but if you didn't, among the many topics that are discussed on Sex and the City, Carrie Bradshaw is basically a columnist, and she works for a couple of different New York City media. Now, let's think that this is the 90s, like this is just the .com era is starting, so this is, not the time in which we're all self-publishers and have TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, while it's never a topic that is discussed, like her economic situation is always a topic that is discussed on the series, but it's not like every single episode we talk about how much she makes. But there's, some hints in the series, and actually it is something that is shared, that she makes $4 a word when she's working on her column for Vogue, right? Why am I sharing this? This is the 90s. So considering that the price of life is way more expensive nowadays than it was in the 90s, $1 in the 90s got you way more things than it does today. Sadly enough, the pay per word in the media world has not increased to the standards. It's completely the opposite. Nowadays, I have been doing this for almost 20 years now. I have never charged, not even remotely close to $4 American per word. And I don't know anyone that has charged something similar to $4 per word. I know some people that every once in a while are super lucky and they get paid like $2, maybe $2.50, and that's kind of like, hit the jackpot. Why am I sharing this? So while the series was not actually created by her, Candace Bushnell is the writer of the book Sex and the City, in which the series is based. And she actually shares that back in the day, again in the 90s, when she was actually writing a column for Vogue, she was making $5,000 a month producing one column for Vogue. That's actually, one of her columns. That's it. You can see it. It is available in Vogue's archive. So if you're interested, go on and check. I am so sorry to be the one bearer of really bad news, but while I think that there's definitely a chance for people to get into the content production realm and do incredible things with travel content production, I doubt that you can produce one column a month and earn 5,000 American dollars. Now, if you do, please, I beg you, share Pandora's box secret with me, but that's not likely the case, right? This is part of like a report that Jasper AI produces each year. Now, Jasper AI is one of the many artificial intelligence tools that are out there. This one specifically is designed for the marketing world. And on this report, they are sharing based on surveys, based on different samples of the people that they work with and questions that they share with their subscribers. How much do freelance writers charge? They do say that there's like 3 different methods in which usually freelance writers charge, which is per word, per hour, or per project. When it comes to projects, they say anything from $50 to $1,500 for one article. It's not often the case that it's $50, but it's even less likely the case that it's 1,500 American dollars. And I am sorry that I am sharing something that is pretty American in this case. But again, like the best thing that I can do is share the things that are like closer to me, and having lived and worked most of my life in North America, this is kind of like the things that I am used to. Now, when it comes to words, it says freelance writers charge anything from 1 cent per word to $2. So in this case, we see $2 is already kind of like you hit the jackpot. And again, back in the 90s, Carrie Bradshaw was charging $4 per word. I wanted to be able to share something that is actual editors requesting pitches. This is for Jet Setter magazine, which is a luxury travel magazine based in Hong Kong. In this specific case, they are paying 250 Hong Kong dollars per word. That's kind of like roughly 32 American cents, like 28 euro cents. Here's another one. Journey is a really beautiful, kind of new but well-established quarterly from the UK. In this case, they are paying 300 British pounds for 1,500 words, right? So this is kind of like for you to have an idea. Now, these are just brief examples. This isn't like a super massive worldwide sample, but it gives you a hint of how the landscape looks, right? Which takes us back to the New York Times. This is an old 36 hours in Anchorage. If you're familiar with American travel literature, the New York Times came up with this format a long time ago. It's one of like their staples when it comes to travel. And we've seen all kind of media and magazines either syndicating this or creating their own. But the New York Times 36 hours in is kind of like a staple. So this one is one that I chose like randomly. It was in there, 2017, 36 hours in Anchorage. It is there. One of the reasons for which I chose this one is if you want to check it out and you're not a subscriber of the New York Times, this one, because it's like long, it's like old enough for the New York Times to actually share it and making it available for people who are not subscribers. So you can check it out. Anyway, it is like the typical what to do in a weekend, and you start Friday, you do this one thing, and then in the night you go to this one restaurant, and then Saturday morning, and so on. These are some of the things that are like listed on the article that I have personally checked. So this is just a hike. So he, like the author is recommending a hike, and he's saying like, hey, and if you are worried about bears, or if you just want to go with someone to show you the way, Ascending Path has the tour available, and they charge $139 per person. Then when it comes to hotels, they are recommending a couple of different hotels, one of them being Hotel Captain Cook. By the way, let's remind ourselves that when it comes to Alaska, October is already kind of like low season, okay? For 2 nights in October, this is something I checked like a few days ago. It is $489. For the next part, like I wanted to do this with absolutely everything, but that required a huge amount of time. So I just asked ChatGPT if, based on the things that are mentioned in this article, if it could come up with kind of like a rough estimate of how much would it cost, and, you know, experience firsthand the things that the 36 hours in Anchorage article shares. And it's roughly $1,157. Again, there are some things that are missing. It depends on what you have for dinner, right? You can go to the same restaurant that the person is suggesting, and it's not the same if you're having caviar or if you're having mac and cheese, assuming they have both. The article has 1,670 words. If we were to get $2 per word, we are talking about more or less $3,300, right? Now, this is exclusively the cost of the things on destination. Like if you actually have to pay for airfare to get to Anchorage, which is likely the case unless you live there, and there's just like so many 36 hours in Anchorage that you can do, right? So imagine, how do you actually make the work sustainable if you have to pay for absolutely everything and you are not getting expenses covered? Now, if you are on staff for certain companies, it is likely the case that expenses are going to be covered. That depends on the company, of course. But most of the times, freelance writers do not get travel expenses covered. If you're not getting the travel expenses covered and you're going to an Amman or a Six Senses or a Four Seasons and you're paying $1,700 a night, it is very unlikely for you, even if you end up hitting the jackpot and getting the $2 per word rate, to be able to actually make more money than you're going to spend on going to these places. And again, it's not because these hotels are not willing to host you or give you a media rate, which probably they would. You just can't do it if you're working for, in this particular case, the New York Times, right? So one more quote. This one is from a singer that I did know before. And she says, "I just don't sing for free. It's my work. You're paid for what you do, and I work hard." So when it comes to ethical journalism and understanding that there's clearly a conflict of interest if I am covering a hotel that is hosting me, if I am producing content about a destination that is hosting me, if I am writing about an attraction that is hosting me, how do we produce ethical journalism while making the job viable at the same time? Now, there's many sidekicks that you can do. There's many things that you can do. What I can share is that nowadays, and again, this is just me, these are based on my experience, my friends, my colleagues that are in the business. Back, in the 90s, I had like 5 years, so it was clearly not my experience. I was not producing columns for Vogue. But when I started doing this almost 20 years ago, if you had asked me what was my main source of income, I could have said, I license photos to magazines and I write travel articles for magazines. Nowadays, I still do that, but my main source of income has diversified. And it's that, but it's also marketing and newsletters, but it's also my own personal social media, but it's also photos that I share on my blog that end up being used without permission that then I have to charge for, and like those many examples. So, but I think this question is really important because most of the times when we're talking about sustainability in the tourism world, we don't think about sustainability of the job of the content creator itself, and the work has to be sustainable for it to be viable and exist in the long term. So if we want to throw in there some more questions that might actually start debates, if you are not supposed to take any comms, if you're not supposed to accept any media rates, and that's in the name of like ethical journalism, because we do see that there's clearly, or there could potentially be a conflict of interest, who gets to actually work and who gets to actually review hotels that charge $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a night for a publication that is not actually willing. And again, this is not like I don't have answers. I have plenty of questions. I don't have an answer, but I do think that those are important questions that we can share among ourselves when it comes to the media landscape today and travel journalism as a whole. Because I have limited time, I cannot talk about all the many topics that I'd love to discuss, but I think these are two of the examples that can show us that there's way more to talk when it comes to sustainability in the travel industry, aside from the do not wash your towel every single day and let's get ourselves like one refillable water bottle for each hotel or destination that we go to. Any questions, any reflections, any thoughts that you'd like to share? No, Sophie says it seems kind of impossible to be an ethical travel influencer. Then no, I don't think that it is impossible. I think it truly depends on what one considers to be ethical. Like if you ask me, I do see the conflict of interest of reviewing a hotel that actually hosted me. Now, does that mean that whenever I'm writing a review, I don't actually write what I think or what I found my experience to be? No. That's one thing. One more example. Some media actually do have a principle in which they have to state, at some point, either at the beginning of the article or in the end, the writer was hosted by the tourism office of XYZ. So there's many different ways in which it can happen. Like I can share one more example. In my personal blog, which I started it being like super naive, super romantic. Like I don't want to be the one creating one more blog about the 10 must-see beaches in Mexico, because who am I to talk about all the beaches in Mexico? What are the best if I'm not even sharing the criteria, right? And I haven't been to every single beach in Mexico. So who am I to determine which are the 10 bests? But and I did want to be sure that I was including in my blog info, like if I was producing content as a result of a trip that was hosted, I wanted to share that. My blog is not, read by 7 million people a month, but apparently there's something about my blog, and every once in a while I do get different companies interested in publishing something in my blog, either because they want something written by me because they like the style, or because they like my photo style, or sometimes because they just want a do follow link from a website with an interesting authority in terms of domain. And some of them actually, everything seems to be working all right. And then when we're doing it, they don't want to actually finish the deal, because I tell them, like, if we're working on this, I am going to, in the end state, this is paid content by, and the name of the company. Some companies find that to be the most like honest thing to do, and they just kind of like assume, of course, if I am paying for this, it just say that it's some sort of advertorial. And some other companies refuse completely. So it truly depends on the media that we're working on, our own principles, and but I do think there's ways of it. It also depends on the kind of travel content that you want to be producing and your own economical situation, right? So maybe you inherited 7 mansions and one chunky bank account with millions of dollars that allow you to go and stay at these hotels and review 5-star hotels and paying for every single stay, which it'd be awesome for you. Again, I still think that it should take back to the question, like, who gets to produce this content if you have to pay for it? But it truly depends on that. If you ask me, that's a question that I ask myself somehow often, like, would I be able to pay for this specific thing if I wasn't here for work? And if the answer is no, then I'm always thinking about, okay, so then what's in it other than me being able to do it because I happen to have this job? And I think that question has led me to interesting reflections. Sometimes they are shared on my articles, sometimes they aren't. But I think there's ways. I'm answering Sophie's question. Yes, I did mention, but yeah, I think it's the ethical thing to do. If you accept a trip hosted by a company to state that you were traveling as, a hosted producer. But that was just that quick answer to Sophie. Now, I wouldn't like everyone that was, seeing potential and hope in creating travel content to leave this class going like, oh my God, no, it's going to be impossible. There's no way around it. The proof that you can actually do it is that I'm here. I have colleagues that are here. I have friends that started to do this, some on their own, some launched magazines, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And again, I have been doing this for almost 2 decades, and they are doing great. So there's ways around it. But I do also think that it's important because, every once in a while, whenever I'm traveling and I share what I do, I get asked this question, like your fellow travelers ask, so wait, like you're here and like National Geographic is paying you to do all these things and you just have like, and only a Black Centurion American Express that National Geographic pays for? No. I wish it was, but that's not the case. So I think it is important for us, especially for us that are in the industry, to, set the tone as honest and transparent as possible. With that said, no, I don't have a Centurion card that is, paid for one of these big titles. But I have been doing this. There's plenty of projects that I find very, very attractive and appealing in the future, in the near future. I have been working on some really exciting stuff. So it is possible. I just don't want you to leave the class and, getting the master's thinking that you're going to get paid $8 per word to write a column for Vogue, because you might, but I don't think so. So we do have to keep in mind that and see that there's other ways around it. And the best thing that we can do if we truly are interested in this is to discuss those things and to find those many ways in which we can make it work. Because there's definitely ways to make it work, maybe just not becoming the next Carrie Bradshaw. Sorry, Edgardo, for the interruption, but I thought that...
No, it's okay.
I didn't want to end the class on this tone and having everyone going like, well, I wanted to, but now I'm just going to sell stuff on eBay. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye, Edgardo. Bye, everyone.